Hello and welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hopkins. Today I have Margaret Henoch as a guest, a career intelligence officer at the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. She served over 2 decades in the CIA's Directorate of Operations and Analytical Divisions, retiring in March of 2009 after 22 years of service. Margaret held the position of branch chief in the CIA's European Division, working under Chief Tyler Drumheller during the early 2000s intelligence oversight. Known for her principled skepticism, particularly confronting the reliability of key sources, including the infamous Curveball in the lead-up to the Iraq War, where she flagged grave intelligence concerns within the agency. Margaret was recognized as a senior analyst and central group chief. She provided critical insight and oversight of European-based human intelligence operations. Margaret continued to participate in public forums and expert panels. She appeared on 60 Minutes and engaged in policy discussions, bringing inside perspectives on national security and intelligence. Margaret Henoch's career was defined by analytical rigor, operational leadership, and moral courage. As a key figure in assessing and challenging pivotal intelligence inside both operational and analytical realms, she helped shape the CIA's internal accountability mechanisms and its approach to briefing policymakers. I have to tell you, if you like it direct, if you like it blunt, and from somebody who cuts through the bull and just tells it like it is, then you are in for a treat. So sit back, relax, and let's get right into this episode with Margaret Henoch. Okay, Margaret, question for you. We just recently had a pretty major world event that took place that relied on some intel, some pretty critical intel, but we've also had a situation now where we're getting conflicting reports from the White House and the intelligence agencies themselves, and it's creating quite a stir. You have a little bit of experience in the area of intel. I'll tell you what let's do, if you don't mind. Let's backtrack to the weapons of mass destruction and lay a foundation there.
Okay.
And then we'll come forward to present day.
Okay.
So, tell me about your involvement and specifically maybe the framework that you were presented with when you got involved and what you were asked and told to do.
Okay. I was at the time working in headquarters of CIA in Europe division because my boss at a previous job had asked me to come work for him there. So that's where I was. And I was, the offices in Germany were part of my thing. And I was minding my own business, and he came down to my office, which almost never happened, so I figured it was bad. And he said, Jim Pavitt, the DDO, had asked that somebody take a look at what did he say? The source of the BMD in Iraq. And he asked me if I would do it because the guy was in Germany. So I said, sure. And it's a piece of vetting agents is a piece of what the business is and should always be part of. And so I didn't know where there's a ton of material, so I asked 2 guys who worked for me to go find it and bring it to me and to read it so that I would have somebody to talk to. So they brought it to me, and about, 3 days later, I finished it. It actually took us a while to get the information. The people who held it didn't want to give it to us, and by sort of the way we worked, I should have had complete access from the minute it started because it was taking place in Germany. So we got all of it. And as I read through it, I talked to one of the guys who was a longtime German hand. And I asked him what he thought, and he said, "Oh, you're going to be insane." So I thought, okay, not a good start. So I start reading it, and I can't find what the way it works is you get cables from the field or cables from somewhere that talk about the personality, the background, the biography of the person they're talking to, just so that you can figure out what you're dealing with. So I started to look for it, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find his name. I couldn't find where he grew up. I couldn't find where he was from. I couldn't find how he got out. And that bothered me. And then there was no data on that kind of stuff. All I saw was his intelligence reports, and I don't know, I'm hesitant to use this word, I don't know jack about biological weapons. I mean, if it had been other things, I might have been able to do it. And I have some background in estimating weapons capabilities from a distance. But BW, I don't know. So I started to ask, like, who is this? What's he doing there? So I put together my first reaction to it and sent it up the chain, which was, we know nothing about him. I know nothing about him. I can't find out why I should trust him. Because without any background, you don't know why you should trust him. And frankly, it's just like when you do anything. Like if you go to buy a car and it's some guy on a country lot who has two cars and one is a 400-year-old Volkswagen, you might be a little goosey, especially,
Sure.
So you have to find out, where did he come from? What did he study? How did he get into the business? Where did he work? And I couldn't find any of it. And then when I started to read it, it just didn't sound right. So I wrote a thing that said, I don't know what's there, but I don't know what he knows either, and I don't know who he is, and that's a problem. That would have been, say, mid-September 2002. So in mid-October, when it had all sort of passed through, I got a call to go up to the deputy director of CIA's office and talk to his executive officer, whom I'd known for a long time and who was from the operational side. I should have said that first. The stuff was all written by WinPack, which was allegedly a combination of operational knowledge and expertise. So, okay, I believe that. So we get up to talk about it, and we start talking, and I say, well, we don't know his name. And they all just sit there. And I said, we don't know where he's from. And I'm saying this I said to them, I'm saying this based on the fact that nothing's written down. And they all just sort of sat there. And I thought, this is sort of weird. So then I said, and I don't know enough about biological weapons to sort of read the mechanical part of it. So can somebody which one of you is the biological weapons person? And again, they just sat there. And of course,
Wow.
I was not known, nor am I known now, for controlling my temper. And my mentor at CIA I love him dearly. I still am in touch with him, but he was the least temperate person on the earth. He was a smart guy, but oh my God. I can't even tell. That's where I learned the F word. And how you could use it as any form of speech.
You sure can.
And I am expert. So I said, okay, so who's the expert? And then I said to the guy I knew, who's the BW person here? And he said, well, mostly they're history and political science majors. Which I said, okay. So when we're looking at the thing that you think he's saying we should look for, nobody in this room knows what that looks like. Have I got that right? And they started to get prickly, which they should have. And it just sort of went down in a giant, cloud of fire and smoke because I just got mad. And I kept asking them, what's his name? How do we know it? How did somebody interview him? Nobody answered anything. So I said to them, here's what I think. You guys have found a couple of paragraphs in an intelligence report that you're putting forward as real intelligence. And they said, okay, we're done. So I went back and I said to my boss, okay, it's covered. I told him I thought he was worthless. Yeah, not covered. Just before Thanksgiving, we have another meeting, and it's exactly the same dynamic. I'm still bitching about, I don't know any details. I can't find any cable traffic. Somebody should give, and you, sir, who are the big head honcho here, you should be getting it for me. Then they all just sort of still look at me. So then one of them starts to argue with me, which is fabulous as far as I'm concerned. And I say, well, what makes you think it's biological warfare? And she says, because he said it was.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. So I said what I always say. So if I brought you my Volkswagen Beetle and told you it was a Mercedes, would you buy it from me for $72,000? She looked at me. I mean, you can imagine it wasn't pleasant, but it was fine with me. So I went through all of my objections, which I can enumerate for you, but it's a long list. And we broke up again, and I thought I'd killed it again. And then 2 days before the slam dunk meeting that Tenet had at the White House, we had another meeting. And again, they couldn't explain anything to me. I kept arguing with them. The referee said nothing. And I kept thinking, why do you keep calling me back? I can't figure out what this is. So they said, well, it's in the middle of this, George Tenet, we're in his area, who knows me, sort of reaches his head in, or sticks his head in, and he says to everybody, don't trust her, pointing at me. She's out to something, just sort of a yuck, 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 yuck. But of course, I thought that should have meant that he and I know each other. Therefore, you should maybe take me seriously.
Right.
But of course, that's not what happened. So it all blew up again. And I just thought, okay, well, they're not going to ask me anymore. End of January, it's the Powell speech. We get a copy of the Powell speech because that's the way it works. They send it to the intelligence piece that has the account. And I read it, and it's all the stupid curveball BW information. And they've got these trailers, and it's just like, I mean, I knew this because I knew it from previous experience. The Soviets had an MX weapons trailer that they put missiles on, and they moved it around the Soviet Union so you couldn't find it. So am I talking way too fast?
Not at all. I think my listeners will love this.
Okay. So I say to them, how do you know what you're looking at? How do you know that it's not, he didn't make it up. How did he get out of Iraq? An Iraqi in this kind of a position, as is true in most countries like that, can't just leave. So how did that happen? Still no answer, but we know he's an expert because he told us he was. And that.
Sure.
And so I went back and said, I mean, so we came to nothing. And I went back down again to my boss and said, okay, here's what happened. And I wish I had the memos, but they're all classified. And unlike some people that we could mention, but we won't, I don't think it should be in my bathroom.
Right.
So I don't remember the exact dates or some things like that, but I know I sent an incredibly pissed off memo and wrote to the 7th floor, which is the director, crossed out all the stuff that they shouldn't have been using and said, you can't use this, and wrote on the paper, you cannot use this. This is not proven. It may be completely untrue. They may have something, but this guy doesn't know anything, which I thought was the safest and most accurate way to say it. So then my boss says to me, the day the speech is on, he calls me and says, come up to the office and we'll watch the speech. And of course it opens with Powell in front of those pictures. And one of the people who was in the room watching the briefing with us said, oh, I heard that Bush wanted a Adlai Stevenson Cuba moment. So, you can only,
Sure.
You can imagine. So
Yes.
I went back up and wrote another thing about what are you doing? What is this? We don't know what it is. And then I sent a piece to DOD and said, how come you guys believe this? Tell me what's making you believe it, because I don't get it. And I could be wrong, but nobody's given me a reason to believe that I'm wrong. So instead of writing me a cable back, a guy who worked at DIA, whom I knew, brought me a copy of the cable that I had sent, and it was all marked up with snotty little, oh, look, it's this kind of a person who's going to tell us what we're doing.
Right.
So I said to him, get me the names of these people. Not for now, but let me have my ammunition. And of course, shortly before we went in, we had another call to come to another meeting. It was the same thing. So that's, I think, 5 or 6 meetings like that. So I just figured they kept trying to make me change my mind. I couldn't figure out why until all of a sudden, when they went in and they didn't find something quickly, I thought, they knew it wasn't. I mean, I'm not sure that our people knew.
Right.
They were not the brightest bulbs in the chandelier, but it was clear that they didn't care. It wasn't that they knew or they didn't, they just didn't care.
And was it at this moment, Margaret, that your bullshit detector went off, or had it already been triggered?
It was, in fact, my parents lived, it was in Washington at the time, they lived just on another suburb. And my mom said to me, when they finally announced that they hadn't found anything, she said to me, do you think you can relax now? I said, has it been that obvious? And she said, how many times do you normally say the F word in a day?
Right.
Frequently. So yeah, I was insane by Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Now, I've got a question for you, because having served in the military, I'm very familiar with the chain of command and how you don't, in the military anyway, you don't customarily call out somebody in the rank above you, particularly at the top. That's just not how business is handled. But when it comes to matters of life and death and war and troops' lives and all of that, is the culture any different at the CIA in terms of if there's somebody that you feel is so wrong and making such a bad decision that there's kind of an open door policy of come in and unload and let me know?
Not to the top. But what struck me at the time, through the whole thing, I kept thinking, there must be a piece of this that I don't have. There's probably that I'm not cleared to know, and that's fine. That's how compartmentation works. But there's got to be something that I just don't know, because nobody's reacting to me. Every time the meeting before the slam dunk meeting was, 5 days before Christmas. And the DDO, instead of the guy in charge of the operations directorate, instead of sitting through the meeting, sort of stood up halfway through and said, I have to go buy my wife a Christmas present, and walked out. And I was like, okay, I don't know what this is, but something else. So again, I sort of thought they've got some fabulous agent who's giving them great stuff, and this is what they're going to tell people, but it's not the real thing. I couldn't think of any, and believe me, I was not a Bush supporter. I was not terribly fond of most people in the world at that point.
Sure.
Kind of like now.
Right.
But it just never occurred to me. And I knew Tenen. Actually, Tenen and I had spent the day before the slam dunk thing, he and I spent about 2 hours roaming around the building looking for a foreigner who had come to visit him, a senior guy in another service, that nobody could find. He had gotten into the building or he was standing somewhere. And so I was with Tenen for that whole time, and it wouldn't have ever not occurred to me to stop him and say something.
Question for you that I often think about, because clearly certainly in many facets of the CIA, deception is a powerful tool. When we look at deception as a tool to obtain the kind of information that we need to be able to keep America safe, can you take just a moment and speak to the difference between deception used as that and an administration just knowingly outright lying, not for the benefit of the United States, but for the benefit of the administration?
I don't know that it's ever happened before now that I knew of. I mean, I'm guessing that may have been Johnson, but thankfully I was just a small person at that point. And I don't know what the Bush administration was doing. I don't know that they were actively lying. I think they really believed that they would find something. At least I would like to think that that's what they did. And I don't know whether that's my innocence, which I am not, just for the record, or my sort of faith in government and faith in the way the thing works, which until fairly recently has always been pretty significant. My dad was a federal worker. I have a brother who was a Fed. My baby brother for a while was a federal prosecutor. So I come from that family. And in all honesty, even the people that I don't love at work, it's basically a bunch of people who are pretty solid and pretty good. And it just never occurred to me that the administration would be that dreadful. They would follow policies that I might not agree with, but that kind of lying. And when it became actually, Jack, more probable maybe, was when they were making the case that Mohammed Atta had met Saddam Hussein in Czechoslovakia, I think, in the Czech Republic. That may be wrong, but he had met him somewhere. And they kept saying it, and they kept saying it. And we talked to, the officers there, and they kept saying, no. And then it sort of felt like lying. But again, that was the Hill instead of the president. At least that's who I saw there.
Right.
So I would say, I don't think I've seen administration be that, well, as dishonest as I think the current one is.
Right. Okay. And that's interesting, and I'm glad you pointed that out. One thing I try to always remind myself is that regardless of the level from which something's occurring, where human beings are involved, they are still human beings who are just as vulnerable to the same type of biases that myself or anybody else is. So, for example, we've all probably made a purchase or made some decision where there were some things that popped up that were saying no, but we wanted it so bad that we justified going ahead. Is it fair to say that kind of thing, you've seen that also happen on higher levels where it's really critical?
My assumption is that's what happened with Iraq.
Okay.
They really wanted, I still don't know why they wanted to go in, but they really wanted to go in. And I have a fabulous book on the topic. He is a friend, but he's also a real journalist. Robert Draper's To Start a War. He walks through sort of how it happened, and it makes, and I read everything because of where I was. I don't think it was, I think they really wanted to go in and do something. And what I don't understand is You're the president of the United States. Don't let the current one hear this. Like, so say you want to go in, especially after 9/11, which is, Jack, another factor. That 9/11 changed things, I think. We went from being sort of reasonable and a little bit less afraid. And all of a sudden, everybody was afraid. And I think that changed things. I don't know whether it's changed back, because I think I told you I retired in 2006 because I could, but partly because it wasn't the place that it had been.
Yeah, right.
So I do think they did that. I'm sorry to keep talking.
No, not, gosh, I want you to talk forever.
Oh, be careful what you wish for.
You know, I have to say, I have to take a moment to say this, that of all of the CIA people that I've had on the podcast, the thing that I find is consistent, even when I happen to know or they've indicated in some way where they may be politically, I have found that all of my CIA guests are about as clear-eyed and unlikely to make accusations or to assign things to somebody that they don't know for sure. And that, for me, I think there's such a, as I'm sure you know better than I, public perception has been so shaped by Hollywood about the CIA, right? And then with the advent of the internet, people being able to look at files of MK Ultra and you know, all of those things. And that, to them, that's the CIA, right? And my experience has been so far removed from that if, let me put it this way, if you're a podcast host who's looking, you run kind of a hammer 'em, just pound them with anything kind of show, CIA people are not who you want to have on, because they're going to stick as close to facts as they know how to. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you. I think
You're welcome.
the ones that I've watched of yours, I mean, I know Cash and I know Cypher, and that's totally them. And in fact, when I joined the agency approximately 100 years ago, I figured I was the only, I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, good liberal, I was born in Los Alamos, so that gives you sort of the picture.
Yeah.
And a pretty liberal family. I worked for Ralph Nader before I joined the agency.
Interesting.
And so people I knew, I assumed wouldn't be there, and everybody would be pretty much a right wing. In those days, right wing wasn't what it is now, but would be much more conservative than I. And I was so stunned when, and nobody ever said anything about it until after 9/11. I had no idea what anybody's politics were. I just sort of assumed that everybody was over there, and it turned out they weren't. But it was something that just was not talked about, ever.
Yeah.
And it was really, you didn't stuck to what you knew to be true.
Well, that's what I find so interesting about the steady state, right? Is the when you go down the list of names of the people who are members and participating in the steady state, while I certainly don't know the political affiliations of all of them or even most of them, but you can see there's a pretty diverse group, and I make the assumption that there's a pretty good mix politically, but everybody's focused on the task at hand, which I guess is maybe a good reflection of how it was and is inside the CIA itself, that we're here to do a job. So I don't need to know your party.
And the other thing I would think, and I don't know this, I'm just sort of extrapolating, is that that's true everywhere else in the government. You have no idea. As I said, my baby brother was a U.S. attorney, and he's pretty conservative. I love him dearly. Sniff, sniff. He's pretty conservative, and one of his closest friends is Jack Smith.
Interesting.
And look at who his sister is. And it's just, I think it's just, you're used to people who, it's just not part of the discussion.
Right. Right. And there's such
really strange. I'm sorry.
There's such no. There's just such value in that, especially when you look at. Yeah, I've said this, I don't know how many times on air, on the podcast. I think the internet has been both one of the greatest and one of the worst things that's ever happened. It's been one of the worst things. Well, even here, it's I think been one of the best and one of the worst. It's allowed groups who have legitimate issues and concerns to be able to come together, right? And to find that, oh, okay, it's not just the five people in my town. There are lots of us. But it's allowed the bad actors, right, to come together in such numbers and with such skills that they do things like influence elections, right? So, yeah, that's a spooky area. I don't want to deviate too far off topic, so I'll come back to. So that culture then, I would assume, having done that as long as you did, that when you leave the CIA, you just don't leave that behind, and which is pretty evident in how you've been speaking so far today, in that, yeah, have been opportunities to say, oh, Bush lied, but you don't have that kind of information in front of you, and so you said, I don't, how.
And believe me, I wanted him to have lied, but I still don't.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. Because we're human, right?
Mostly.
We're right.
Sorry.
Yeah, my wife referenced that to me. We all have, and I think so often, I think there's a lot of people who kind of believe that certain people in certain jobs, because it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of what we've been talking about, that they are so professional and so that they don't have their own emotions, right? That are kind of an aside. And of course they do. We're human beings. It's just that some people, namely yourself and your colleagues, you've learned, as to use a word that you said earlier in a different context, to compartmentalize, right? To acknowledge that and then place it over here and step into a different mindset. How crazy does it drive you?
Totally. And I don't even know what the question is.
How crazy does it drive you to get on, if you get on social media or if you watch the news, if you see, I guess, the dialogue, right, between just everyday human beings about what they know, what they're sure of, that drive you crazy?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I no longer really watch the news. I'm a good coastal lefty, and I listen to NPR for 5 minutes an hour. That's the news. Although I do read most of the standard newspapers that you would expect me to read. Actually, that's not true. I mostly do the crossword puzzles, mostly because I can't stand it. It just makes me a crazy person.
Right.
And you don't get anything, or I don't get anything positive from it. It doesn't tell me we're moving in a good direction. It doesn't tell me people are smarter than they were or dumber than they were. It's just like, oh my God, we're here again.
Yeah.
So I just I can't stand it. And I am not on social media at all.
Yeah. Is that something that you think is probably a lot of CIA people lean in that, or no?
I doubt it. I think I'm just sort of vaguely antisocial and kind of a hermit. Yeah. So I'm happier not knowing things. I know an awful lot of people who spend a fair amount of time on things that I think I've never been on Twitter that I can remember, maybe Blue Sky once or twice, asked to go find something. I've never been on Facebook. I do think there are people who do more than I do. And I think for social reasons. Sure. But it's a different thing than other people who are on Facebook, who are on those, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because of what I do, a lot of people would maybe not guess this. I'm pretty much an introvert, right? So I use social media. That's kind of my social time, right? Because you can just click and you're back to your privacy. Not that I don't have friends. I think I still have one, but really,
all right.
Yeah, all right. But I understand that, and it can be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I talked to John Cipher about this, that I was asking him about sometimes is too much information, does it just slow things down and cloud the issue? And I can't remember his exact answer, but something along the lines of yes, and we have to be very good at sorting and that. So coming back to WMD, tell me a little bit about the sorting process after you saw where everyone was at.
Give me more words about what sorting process is.
Well, when you realize that, okay, this perhaps is what they want to believe, and maybe even in the back of your mind thought, okay, and it could be just utter bullshit, right? Because yes, it's what they want to believe, and perhaps for a good reason, but then maybe Mr. Bush just harbors some ill feelings towards how his father was treated and has that agenda. How do you go through sorting the information that in your case you didn't have, right? But that you were being fed that wasn't really information in the first place?
I think it sort of has gone back for me to all the times that I thought about whoever it was in a different circumstance. So that if it was somebody that I generally thought, yeah, that person's a pretty, not my same shooting distance, but they know what they're talking about and they're generally honest about things like that. And if it was somebody that I didn't, in sort of the administration terms, I just didn't, they were still just as dishonest. What they did and things like that, I had my opinions formed pretty early on based on the same things that everybody does, although mine are probably harsher and far less flexible, I'm guessing. But I think I started, and I think I have a feeling that I'm not answering your question, Jack, but I had a
No, you are. I like that you just aren't like giving kind of a standard yes, no, here's
okay.
what you asked for, because you're filling in a lot of gaps. Yeah, really.
Not just totally babbling, which is what
No, you're actually, this is the kind of stuff that really fascinates me, because it gives me and the viewers, the listeners, rather than just kind of a record of it, it's giving us an insight to the emotions and the thoughts and the different concepts that were bouncing around in your head at the time.
I think some people read people better than other people read them. And I've always been pretty good at that. And I'm contrasting that with my father, who was the nicest human being on earth ever. And he was a nuclear physicist, and anybody was his friend. Anybody and everybody. The only time I ever heard him say negative things about people, maybe 2 or 3 times in my life, and he lived to be 95, so there was a lot of his life that he did not.
Wow.
And I think that's a little bit of the way a couple of my siblings are. I've always been able to, I think, get a reasonably accurate read reasonably quickly. I also think, and you can totally slap me down if you feel like I'm getting way out of line. I think if you're female and in a particular place in the world, like you want to go to work at someplace like that, or you're at certain other professions or universities, you have to be better at it than you would otherwise, because you'll get run over by it.
Right. And am I right to assume that, much like the military, that's where I guess my reference point is, the CIA, especially during the period that you were there, is very testosterone driven?
Oh my God. It was like a marinade every day.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. And as I said, I was incredibly lucky. My mentor, who was one of the meaner human beings on earth, but he was brilliant and very well respected. And he saved me more times than I can even, it's too embarrassing to admit that I would never have gotten to where I got, because he kept reaching in and grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and saying, stop it, sit down, shut up, I'll tell you when you can talk. And It was mostly because I wasn't recognizing what it was like. When I went through training, there were 64 people in my class, 8 of whom were women, and only 5 of whom were headed to the operations directorate.
Really?
So, and here's the really terrifying thing. I was the first one to be senior promoted, first female in my class. And that is so scary. You have no idea how worried.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That I can only imagine, because did you feel like, okay, well, the camera's on me,
actually,
the spotlight?
I sort of felt like I was getting away with things that people weren't noticing. I believe that may have been an incredibly bad assessment of what was going on, but I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time a few times. And that's, Curveball kind of made my career in some ways. So it wasn't terrible, but I've been lucky through this whole thing, I think.
Yeah.
So
let's I know you may not have, like, be able to say, I know how he felt, she felt, but if the only access to this answer you have is just how you felt about
Okay.
them, how many people in the administration at the time did you sense, and this may just come from watching the news clips of different people speaking, how many of them did you feel at the time were not at all uncomfortable with the WMD presentation as the public was getting it?
I thought Powell was the only one who was uncomfortable. And I didn't think he was uncomfortable enough. But everybody else, and I didn't see I saw lots of underlings of people, lots of congressional staffers, lots of like the guy who was the DOD, what's his name? Rumsfeld's gopher, or whatever he was. Those were the people that I saw more than the actual principals because they didn't come to see my level. They came to see George Tenet and people who were senior to me. But there was never any implication from anything they said and anything I read that maybe this wasn't the right. They started yelling about BMD like 10 seconds after 9/11.
Right.
And it felt, they all felt like that's what they really wanted to think. I don't know that they believed it, but they sure wanted it to be true. And I do remember a couple of senior aides to senior people saying to me, it doesn't matter if Curveball's not right. We'll go in and we'll find something terrible anyway. And I just thought, wow, really?
Yeah.
So that would indicate that it was worse than I initially said to you that it was.
Just what's your opinion on this? Just because of the powerful, domineering type personality he was, how much did you sense that what President Bush was putting forth was because it's what Dick Cheney was leaning into?
It always felt like that was what it must be, but I've had people tell me subsequently, it was Bush.
Really?
Now, I don't know, I have zero idea how accurate.
Sure.
But
Sure.
more than one person has said, no, this was George Bush. And I
That's
just remember
fascinating.
sitting there I guess it was on 9/11, and watching Washington sort of, again, I was in headquarters then, vanish and seeing Bush with the look on his face when they told him he had to stop reading to the kids. And I thought, well, that's got to be Cheney. But I have heard more than 5 people say, it was Bush. So I don't know, but that does never stop me from talking.
Yeah, right. That's good. That's why I like having you on here. When you made and I don't know that this is exactly how this flow chart works, but in what I would call your final assessment, right? When you put forth your final evaluation, how well received or not was it?
Of Curveball?
Yes.
Not well. And in fact, it was so bad that someone who will remain nameless, but who I've mentioned before as a special assistant to the deputy director of CIA, so he's out there and he knows who he is, called me and said, in like a nanny, 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 he said, you were wrong. We found one of the trailers. So I said, great. Who identified it as a BW thing? And he said, Curveball. So I said, so did you show him 2 different trailers? And he said, no, we just showed him that trailer, and he said it was BW. And I said to him, you never took a science class, did you? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, you can't just show him the thing that he's been telling us about and then believe him. And so then I think 4 days later, they sent a BW team out, and they came back and they said, it's a weather trailer. So I got to call him on a big, fancy, secure phone and say, it was an extraordinarily mature moment.
Yeah.
But
is that in your mind similar to putting like one person in the lineup and saying, is this the man who raped you, whatever the case may be?
Especially one person who's wearing the outfit that the person said they were wearing, who has the hair color. I mean, it was just, I remember, again, in like basic science, whatever you took the very first science class, you have to have a control group.
Right.
And I was stunned that somebody at senior CIA levels or senior military levels, and I'm guessing they didn't. I'm guessing they said, well, what does it look like? But the agency had so much vested in Curveball that it was probably somebody from us that said, is this a B, and probably said, is this a BW mobile trailer? And he said,
Yeah.
oh, yes, because that's what you would say when you were a little kid if you did
Sure.
something terrible,
Right.
or at least I would.
How much, and I'm only asking you to speak on the time that you were there, and you may or may not have any real knowledge of this, but if not, just instinctually, when an administration is wanting for this something like this to be true, how much influence does that president or that administration have with the top tier CIA people? For example, George Tenet, are they persuadable?
Oh,
Or
yeah. Sorry, I should have let you finish.
no, that you jumped right to what I wanted to talk about.
I mean, my guess partly is who the senior person is. I think director of CIA might be the worst job in Washington, D.C., mostly because you never get to say, hey, look at what great thing we did. There's always a whole tale of terrible things that go with it. And because when you come out of it, you don't get a good job. I mean, if you do a really good job at state, you get either a huge ambassadorship or a vice presidential nominee. If you do a really good, same thing at DOD, you get out of DC, like, who was it? Woolsey didn't get a great job coming out. What's his name? Webster. I mean, they were all older than dirt. Casey, I think, died instead of coming, which was a little overreaction, but, that, I guess, it worked. So I think part of it is it's a terrible job. And part of it is people, with the exception of the guys who were the head of it sort of before I joined, like, God, I just had his name in front of me, but the guys who came up through the agency, they understood what they were looking at. Others of them just don't know what they're really looking at, and they're much more comfortable, at least I have found, with the analysts, unless they're wanting to have, and forgive me for this, like a frat boy day. Then they like the ops guys because they're all going to sit around and, scratch and do those kinds of guy things. But I think it's a terrible job because you're basically walking into a situation that you don't know anything about. I mean, Hayden was better prepared for it and probably wasn't quite as easily persuadable. But the rest of them just, what, I can't think, Deutsch. And he was very nice to me.
Right.
So I have to say, that may have been one of his biggest mistakes, but he just was clueless. And I think I was way too young or junior to know anything about Woolsey or Webster, but they both struck me as just not really aware of what the building was that they walked into every day. Yeah. And I mean, who actually, Brennan did come up through the ranks. I was long gone. And I have to say that after Curveball, I was so angry and so sort of disinclined to be kind about anything. And I could retire, so I did.
Yeah.
I didn't follow the agency. I didn't pay any attention. Most of my friends were gone. I just said, I am done with this, which is probably not a bad way to leave it.
Right. Regarding Brennan, I will say this, if ever there were a face of seriousness, I mean, boy, I'm sure it was unpleasant to be on the other side of his desk when he was not happy. Just even looking at him was pretty intimidating.
He and I had one bad go-round when I was chief in a place not in this country. And he came to visit, and he didn't come through me, which is protocol. He was supposed to come through me, but he came through, I think, the foreigners. And he showed up in my office, and I was like, what are you doing here? And he told me. And I said, you're supposed to be coming through me. Now, it didn't occur to me at the time that I should worry about being nice to him because he wasn't any part of management. And because I never worried about being nice to anybody anyway. But he, I just had to say that before somebody called your studio and said, by the way, he was just like, and he was completely, he just sort of kept looking at me. I said, no, you do understand that I'm the boss in this country. And you just totally broke protocol. And I could actually call and request that you go home. But our Christmas party's tonight. You want to come? And he did. And then I figured, he could introduce himself to people. So I didn't introduce him to anybody. Boy, that put him in his place. But yeah, he was kind of a jerk, in my humble opinion.
Sure. Yeah, he's definitely not a warm, cuddly kind of guy.
The place isn't long on warm and cuddly, let me tell you.
Yeah, and I want to, before we kind of come forward to current day situation, I want to ask you about that because I get the feeling that your personality and your approach and attitude is such a critical thing in some place like the CIA that I have a newsletter that I write that's very direct. It's very blunt, and it's not a cozy. But the people who subscribe to my newsletter, they're people who have subscribed because that's what they want. They don't want to have to sort through the niceties to get to the meat of the information. Would you say that even people who may personally have found you abrasive, that on a professional level, they appreciated and respected, or sometimes maybe.
About once. I was difficult. I mean, they were not wrong. I was not impressed with any. I don't know why. I mean, what an ego. For absolutely zero reason, by the way. But I guess it just was. Yeah, I had some, and they're still not impressed with me now, nor do they care for me, but they would be confusing me with somebody who gives a rat's ass.
Right.
And there were people, and again, his name is Paul Redmond. He was my absolute savior. And it was just by coincidence that I worked for him and got some good jobs. We had testy moments, but other than him, nobody else quite ever forgave me completely for being me. And I did have, when I was early on in training, this is kind of what it was. And I was in the office of a guy who was really senior to me, but I was just sort of roaming around the building. And I said, I'm going to go do this or whatever. I don't remember what it was. And he said, okay, whatever you do, try not to be yourself. And
the opposite of the usual advice, right?
Try. And I thought, wow. But I suspect that was kind of the opinion of a lot of people. And there were people who still, even to this day, they don't like me. And,
hey,
oh, well.
You've identified something else you and I have in common. So there's that.
Again, you should really keep those things to yourself, but go ahead.
Right. Is that something that you developed throughout your CIA experience, or was that who you were before the CIA?
Probably a little bit of both. This is totally off topic, but it's a great story. I couldn't get a credit card until 1980 because I wasn't married.
Wow.
And I finally got a credit card from a high-end department store in Washington because the woman said to me, is this cash or credit? I said, I don't have a credit card. And she said, stay here. And she got a form and we filled it out and she said, I'm going to get this approved. She went off and got it approved. And I got a credit card from that store, which I still use to this day just because, but I couldn't. So I think that brings something up in you that if you sort of grew up, and believe me, I was incredibly entitled. I have never had I'm not saying that the world was mean to me. It's just, it was how it was.
Right.
So I think it was sort of, and because I'm very secure in my own brilliance, which, not everybody. It's when I listen to this, I think to myself, what are you doing? But it never really bothered me. I mean, I got angry. I didn't get frightened. And that was...
Well, would it be fair to say that within you there is this, I don't know, I see this phrasing used a lot now, when somebody approached you with that attitude, or even maybe just going through the world sensing that attitude about women existed, did that conjure up that, oh yeah, hold my beer,
kind of.
Watch this? Yeah. Was that part of your fuel, do you think?
Probably.
Yeah.
I think it was, wow, I really am not young anymore. This is in like 70s. And women were not in the engineering fields. And women were not next to a MiG-25. And it just wasn't. And it was interesting to see the differences in how people reacted to me. Because I expected the most grief from the fighter pilots. But they were not terrible. The worst were the mechanics.
Really?
And I would be like, really?
Yeah.
Although mechanics are still horrible to me today. So, I guess maybe that's just mechanics. I do think it played into things. Again, Jack, I want to make sure that I was not handicapped by it. I never felt like, I did feel sometimes like, really, that's where you're going to go with this? But I don't think it held me back. It probably benefited me in some ways.
Right. And I really sense that about you, that in no way, shape, or form did you ever feel like a victim,
No.
but that you, if anything, and I'm only saying this because this is kind of how I operate, and I kind of think we're on the same wavelength with this. I'm the kind of person that's quite often I'm glad that pushback exists because I thrive on it. Right? If the world were always nice to me, my motivation level would probably plummet because a lot of my drive is, all right, asshole,
Bring it
watch
on.
this. Yeah. Yeah. So I never, ever in any way feel victimized by anything or like you said, handicapped by any belief approach. I might behaviorally, if you're observing, you might think, boy, but what's going on within me is something totally different. I may be expressing anger, but I'm secretly appreciative for the opportunity, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
totally, totally.
Yeah,
It's a great outlet. And
it
it also
is.
trains you for the next time.
It does. It does. And I think, would you agree with me that we are always teaching others how they can treat us
Hmm.
by what we allow?
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
So if you snip at the hand in front of you a few times, you have conditioning that person to say, go ahead, stick it out as long as you don't mind getting nipped, which I think is important for all of us,
Oh, sure.
because otherwise, if we are across from another human being, we are never not conditioning them for something. So if you would have been in the CIA where tempers were always flaring, except yours probably would have created a more uncomfortable position for you.
Probably.
Yeah,
I also think I was a very good boss. Because there was no bullshit. And I would
right.
say to them, I'm going to come in, I'm going to holler, I'm going to yell, I'm angry. Doesn't mean anything. And people loved me, which is
Yeah,
hilarious. Especially because I was a pain in the ass most of the time.
right.
You weren't really supposed to agree with that quickly.
Well,
I mean, no offense, but I just think also, I suspect it was home. I was a daddy's girl. Daddy, I could do no wrong. I'm the
yeah,
oldest, you know. So I played by the rules mostly, but when
yeah.
I decided not to, it was just ugly.
I'm sure though on a childhood development side of things, it probably did a lot for your sense of security in
Oh yeah,
yourself to have that unconditional love.
yeah.
Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. It gives you, and also because then I don't think any of the four of us ever says, "Oh, well, I must have gotten that wrong."
Right.
I mean, you do sort of say, "Ooh, did I get that right?"
Yeah.
But it's a scary world out there, and
Yeah.
you were thankfully, and he was great, and I appreciate that from you. I I know you're starving. And then there's my new roommate. He has no boundaries either.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the agency was actually, it was worse when I first joined, but they weren't terrible to most women. They were, I'm currently working with a woman at Steady State who I met when I was a baby and trainee, and she was like my idol. I can't really tell you why, but I met her like once again 30 years ago, and we never really knew each other. And now it turns out that she's becoming a really, really good friend for similar sort of experiences because
Right.
we were both brought up in that same craziness and came
Sure.
out of it. And I don't think I came out any meaner than I went in. I mean, you can't work for Ralph Nader and be a shrinking violet.
Yeah, tell me. Obviously, I'm familiar with Ralph Nader and his political history, but on a personal level, I don't know a lot about him. What kind of man was he to work for?
Fabulous. I was in graduate school. I needed a job. He paid like nothing, but I figured it would be a good introduction to things. And he had an umbrella type group that was his sort of liaison to all of his other groups. And I was in that top one. And so I would go out and do banking research stuff in support of the issue of the day back then was redlining. He would send me out to go to banks in all over the country. And he said to me, by law, if you're doing redlining work, you ask the bank, may I see your mortgage book, the thing that you have and may I have a way to copy it, please? And they don't want you to see it, and they don't want you to do that. And he said to me, if they give you any trouble, you say, may I use your phone for a collect call? Of course, now I don't think there's such a thing as a collect call. And call and just ask for Ralph Nader. And if I'm not there, somebody will pretend to be Ralph Nader, and you just say, here's where I am. And I did it 4 times, and all 4 times before I got through the end of the first sentence, the document they didn't want me to see and a means to copy it were on the table in front of me. And he didn't let you go out without protection into sort of hostile things. He was a little humorless.
Right.
But it was a really fun place to work. I mean, a really weird, because actually, I think this might be me, and I'm going to say it before you have the chance to. I like places where you have to be really committed to doing something.
Yeah, I can sense that about you. You're not a 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
No, I'm like, you got the whole thing. And that's why they were both good. So, yeah, he was entertaining, and he could have paid a little better, but...
benefits and all.
I think he felt a benefit was being in his aura.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's probably a common experience, isn't it, when you're working in that sphere. Yeah.
But it was good.
What have you felt in terms of emotions and the thoughts that you were having about those emotions as you've watched the last 4 days of people saying we don't know at this point exactly how much damage we did, and a president and SecDef saying it was obliterated? Bring back memories.
And they're all unpleasant. This one feels worse to me. I mean, that one was pretty miserable, but I was too wrapped up in it. Of course, then that one wasn't as miserable because I got to say in the end of it, wait, so I was right?
Yeah.
Which, of course, I said loudly and frequently. This one is appalling, I think. It's just, and it takes me sort of back to what I think I said earlier, but of course, that's too long ago. I can't remember. It's so bad, and it's so wrong, and it so teaches the world and the country the exact opposite of what should be happening after something like that, in my opinion.
Right.
And I don't know whether I have the advantage of, having been alive during Vietnam and remembering what that was like, or that's no advantage at all. But it's just to be so comfortable with such dishonesty and to not get any, I mean, that's one piece of it, I think, Jack, but the other piece of it is, where are the people from that party who are saying, hey, wait? I mean, where's Lindsey Graham? I know that everybody's going to, or maybe we don't want the answer. Where are the people who serve, like Joni Ernst? Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
He served there. How can you allow them to reduce it to the guys who flew the planes?
Right.
And how can you allow him to not? It's like, I don't even know what else to say. It feels worse to me than Curveball felt.
Without asking you to, because I know you wouldn't, without asking you to say, yes, he's lying, no, he's not
He's
lying.
totally lying.
Okay, yeah. And I think, do you agree with me that we can say that about this among other reasons, because we have such a rich history of his willingness to blatantly lie, that
His affinity for it.
right.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me that if something had really happened, people wouldn't. Nobody wants the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And it's not like he bombed, Los Angeles and said, although he's moving in that direction, nobody wants that to happen. But it seems clear that it didn't. And to not be able to say we don't know yet, or we're going to do the best we can with what we have, it's like having a 2-year-old in charge.
It is. It is. Are there people?
I'm sorry, you go.
No, you go right
I was just
ahead.
going to say, I don't think it was the same thing as Curveball, because when it turned out that there was nothing there, nobody said she's lying or, oh, he's lying. I mean, they didn't say, oops, which
That's a key point.
helpful. And they didn't accuse anybody of lying, and they didn't like screw over the people in those positions who kept saying it.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up, because that's easy to overlook. That's a really defining difference between those two events. Do you feel there are people in the CIA, or let's just say this, are there people within our intelligence agencies, good people who've been there a while, who have not yet been, escorted out, so to speak, that when they see this, when they see him coming on, even in the face of his own intelligence people saying, look, slow down, here's what the intel is, and him to go right back to it's obliterated, are there people within our intelligence agencies that are going, Jesus Christ, what? He has no idea the danger that he's putting this nation in. Is that an ongoing experience?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
I mean, and I would assume that's true pretty much in other places besides just intelligence.
Yeah.
But I would think that people are just, does he have any? I mean, the answer to that question is he doesn't care. Whether he knows it or not is not the question. It's that he doesn't care. But I'm sure that is, I mean, and people are, I have met several who are terrified and want out, and they're not old geezers like, I think I just said to you that my dear friend Steve said to me, yeah, well, they're not grizzled old ladies like you are. I was like, excuse me? But they're not old ladies. They're, in their early fees, and their careers have been upended, and their mortgages can't get paid, and they don't see any upside to him being there.
Yeah.
And then when he lies about things, the intelligence community does not need anybody to lie about it. It does a perfectly good job of not doing the right thing every time. Yeah. And it's just a horrible, and it's a betrayal, it's also a betrayal.
Well, that leads me to my next question. How much, just through his undisciplined use of speaking, right, that it's just a flow of, it's like laying on Freud's couch, right, and just free association, how much intel does he give away on a weekly basis to the people who are watching and listening, who know how to read between the lines?
I don't know, but if I were working there, I would be terrified. My question is, are they telling him anything?
Yeah.
I mean, if I were still there, would I be? And my guess is if I were still there, I would just be lying through my teeth.
Right.
But I can say that now because I have a great pension and I'm retired.
Sure.
I'm filled with wisdom now that I don't have to actually. But I think I'm sure it's horrible. I'm sure every day people say, let's not tell him these 6 things. And then somebody overrules it because that he's going to just say something stupid. The advantage is he probably doesn't read anything. So I would just keep having him read stuff and it won't get retained.
Yeah. In terms of that, because we've heard many reports on that he doesn't read. And in fact, I don't know how credible this is, but I heard this and I can't tell you where I heard it right now, but somebody speaking about, I think it was on a podcast, somebody speaking about that the administration was even thinking about creating a Fox News type show where they could have like host speaking this stuff, so he didn't have to read it, right? Because he's so riveted to watching something like Fox News that they thought maybe we can get him. Now, I have no idea whether that's true, but with what I've seen from this White House, it wouldn't surprise me.
It's in the realm of possibility without question.
What's the danger of a sitting president having no interest in the intel briefings?
World War III, not to overstate. I mean, he doesn't know. I think we're actually seeing bits and pieces of the danger with the NATO meeting and the Group of 7, the G7 earlier in the week, when they're saying, oh, well, we're only going to meet for 2.5 hours. We're not privy to know what else they're talking about without us there. We're not privy knowing, I'm guessing that somebody would tell a trusted whomever, but who do they trust at this point in the U.S. government?
Yeah.
You can't. The danger is that we're going to get left out of everything from climate change to vaccinations, that we're just not going to have a huge blank slate because people, whether it's the intelligence community or not, they're not going to share stuff because they don't know what he's going to do with it, assuming he remembers it for 10 seconds, is going to be bad.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't like the messenger, if he's decided that he doesn't like the Italian prime minister, who was really making good faces the other day, if I were the Italians, I'd be waiting for what the next shoe to drop was going to be. And I guess was it the Queen of the Netherlands who was also making faces at him. But that's also, in a different way, even the fact that they're making faces on camera internationally is a terribly damaging thing because we used to have stature. We don't have it anymore.
We don't. And boy, that stings to admit, doesn't it? It really does. I referenced a minute ago, I asked you how much intel do you think he gives away just through lack of discipline? And let me speak directly to that, kind of what I had in mind. Because Trump has 8 years, not including his prior life, 9 years of conditioning us to know that everything he says is a lie, here is what my mind immediately went to 3 weeks ago, when he said he was going to put things on pause for 2 weeks regarding Iran. Now, I didn't know clearly, but in my gut, I knew he's probably going to take military action. My assumption is somebody in the regime in Iran had that same gut feeling because we have intel reports that they moved. We don't know exactly what, but they were in the process of moving. It could be, do you think, that he might have conditioned that regime to also know that everything he says is a lie? So if he says, hey, pause for 2 weeks, we better get ready for a strike.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure you're right. It seems like a ridiculous assumption that nobody's, because they don't know whether he's going to launch a nuclear war yet. I mean, it isn't even that they're going to come get us. What's he going to do? Yeah. You just have to assume that you got to be ready for God knows what. And I would not want to be in any of those. And I wouldn't want to be, what's her name in Mexico, except that she's hilarious to listen to.
Oh, she is. Claudia, yes.
And I wouldn't want to be in Quebec, in Canada, because every day they sort of have to wonder, is he really going to come across the border?
Yeah.
And Hegseth certainly doesn't appear to know anything or have any spine.
I had a, not necessarily an experience. I had a thought, kind of an epiphanous moment last night. I've long had on the various social media platforms. I've had a pretty good following from Canada and many different countries around the world, and I used to get a lot of comments and "Go U.S." Prior to the election, right, 2024, and they're polling for you, and you guys got to fight. And I had a lot of dialogue back and forth, and it just hit me a couple of evenings ago. I was like, I don't hear from those people anymore. I mean, I see they've liked a comment or something like that, but as far as they don't have anything positive any longer to say about the United States. And that bothers me, not because I'm pissed off at them. It bothers me because our administration, our president, has shifted everything in terms of public worldwide perception of the United States of America. And for people like you and I was born in 1966, so...
You're a baby.
But I got in on the tail end of cerebrally and awareness-wise of watching what was going on in Vietnam on the news, right? My parents were the Walter Cronkite every evening.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was right there by their side with that. Coming from myself, most of my childhood was in the 70s, right? Wow. it's such a weird sci-fi experience to try to comprehend that the world is now looking at us like this. It's just upside down. And having served in the military, thrown into the mix, it's maddening.
Yes, infuriating. Absolutely. And disabled. You can't feel like you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I think that's another. I mean, I guess this
Which
is
brings me to this question.
steady state.
I asked John Cipher this. I can't remember if I asked Stephen, but I asked John, what is for him personally, so this is for you personally, what is the thing, the experience, the news report of the event? What is the one thing where you are like, fuck me, it's over?
Of the event.
Just the Constitution, the democracy, what this country has been for almost 250 years. What's that moment that rocks you back on your ass and you go, my God, we've crossed the line of no return?
I guess for me, it's another couple of Supreme Court decisions in the directions that I don't want to see them go. And while that's not quite him, that's why we're having those problems.
Absolutely.
It's, I mean, part of it, I just cannot imagine what person on earth resents medical care or food going to poor people, and more importantly, to poor children. Like, Who are you? And I don't know.
Sure.
Those are the things that I mean, the security of the country, that's terrifying. All of that stuff is terrifying. But the stuff about just cruelty is what puts me over the edge. Because I don't think we were ever cruel. We were stupid sometimes. We did the wrong thing sometimes. But we weren't cruel, I don't think.
Right.
And that's, for me, that's what and we're just getting crueler and crueler.
Right.
And I guess, again, this is his existence. But the followers who are not willing to say, wait a second, what do you mean people who have more money than God don't have to pay more? I'm going to have to pay more. And I'm going to have to pay more outside of taxes because people in my community are going to be starving and sick. That's where I have more trouble with that than with my former field of employ, because it's so awful.
I like what you said about cruelty. Obviously, there are a diverse array of opinions on what I'm about to say, so I'm just speaking for myself. Personally, I have never looked at, even knowing how horrible some of the consequences were, I've never looked at President Truman's decision to drop the bombs as an act of cruelty.
Right.
For me, cruelty starts at intention.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you doing what you are doing? If the intention is rooted in solid, pro-American, pro-democracy actions, even if those actions are horrific in the consequences that they create, it was not an act of cruelty. And again, this is my definition.
Right.
Donald Trump is not making most, or some would argue, any of the decisions that he's making with good intentions that support democracy and that defend the Constitution. And I would argue he, as I think, at least on some issues you would agree with me, he engages in acts of cruelty, I think sometimes just because he enjoys acts of cruelty. Any thoughts on that?
Totally agree. He is a bully. He's an old, fat, weirdly orange-faced who he hasn't learned the first basic thing of makeup, which is to blend, blend, blend. Don't have those lines. And that in itself is enough of a crime for me. I grew up in Los Angeles. But I think it's his cruelty which is sort of ever present and omnipresent and at the top of him. Again, that's bad, but the fact that it's being accepted is what I think he's done to the country. I think
Yes.
he has made a whole slew of people unkind and cruel and all of the isms that nobody, even if you're sort of thinking, it's maybe a little, he's just somebody who has made us and our population a crappy place to be.
Yes.
And, I'm not planning to leave because in my world, if there's a way for me to stay here and torture him, that's what I will be doing.
Right. Right.
But I can't imagine being any one of the number of people that he's gone after. What are you doing? Sorry. He's chewing on something.
I'm a pet owner.
Oh,
So yeah, I know how
it happens. No,
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that I would say. He's a horrible, horrible everything.
Yes.
Like, I can't imagine him. There's just no way I can think of, if there's a God, he will go to some place in his afterlife and I will be running it.
There you go. I like
That's
I
what I
like how
want.
you think.
And I'll let you know.
Okay.
But I
Yeah,
think
if you need like a vice president in
somebody
your
who might
capacity.
make me even crazier. That would be good too. The fact that he has been able to turn this country into what it is turning into is just horrible, I think.
I do as well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I've often heard it said that the thing about technology is that it never reverses itself. In other words, it only goes in one direction, right? You don't have something happen, some event, and you get a regression in technology. It continues moving forward. And I think human behavior is very similar to that in that when permissions are given to behave in a certain way, it's very hard to ungive those permissions.
I think you're right.
You know what I mean?
Yes, unfortunately, I think you're completely right. And
Yeah.
I don't know how we do it, and I don't know what we do, but I'm there to try to fight it, and however it is. And I think, unfortunately, it's not just relegated to the intelligence world; it's everywhere, which gives I don't need a a clearance anymore to fight him. But I think you're totally right. It goes in that direction, and I don't know how we bring it back.
Stephen, I remember a lot of what Stephen talked about, but one thing that seared into my mind, because I remember in the moment, kind of the icy chill that I experienced. Not that I didn't already
Right.
know this cerebrally, but coming from him and his background and who he is. Somewhere in the beginning of the podcast, Stephen said to me, he referenced that we're speaking out in support of the Constitution, and I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but essentially we are fighting against this thing that's happening to us. And he said, in a very matter-of-fact way, he said, you and I are both taking a risk doing that. Now, I knew that, but boy, that was a solidifying moment to have someone who had operated in his capacity and experienced and seen the world in the way that he has, something you might expect from your neighbor, just throwing out generalizations. But coming from someone, a qualified comment like that, I was like, yeah, it's not just my crazy ass thinking things like that. It's legitimate, qualified people.
Oh, yeah. I think everything's a risk now. Stuff that didn't use, writing letters to certain people, writing letters to the editor, writing stuff that we're writing and putting up with names on it. And we have, if people can join and not provide their names, not to us, but we'll keep them hidden. And that's just a terrifying place to be.
Yeah, and one that maybe this isn't true of you because of the things that you were privy to and the things you knew about and saw. But I can honestly say for myself, it's a place I just never, in a realistic way, never fathomed. I knew that sure, theoretically, these things happen in other countries, but we were raised on such messages of strength, right? And that the United States was the leader,
Yeah.
and the people looked to us, that it almost created the illusion that this couldn't happen. And I think in some ways that's the very illusion that was taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
Our complacency, our comfortability with it can't happen here. So what could it hurt to vote for the guy? I mean, I think that those things allowed it to sneak up and pop us right between the eyes.
I think you're exactly. That's totally right. And when you come from this can't happen here, you're basically saying, well, I'll just wait till it does.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it's unbelievable.
What measures, if any, when you think about it, do you imagine or not that are happening within our intelligence agencies on some level to say, what, if anything, can we do to compartmentalize or to prevent what we know is eventually going to happen with this kind of recklessness? I guess I'll ask it this way. First of all, do you think anything like that is happening or not? And if so, what are some possibilities?
I hope it is, but I don't know. I think I think people who are currently like in the workforce there and other places are different from the way we were by virtue of their commitment to actually having balanced, healthy lives where, sort of you do say, I don't really have to do this 12 hours a day for 6.5 days a week, which we didn't say. We said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And as I was leaving, they were starting to say to me, well, I can't do that. That's on Saturday. I'd be like, so I'm guessing that the combination of, well, I can't do that because it's going to take longer than 12 hours, but also I don't know how much risk, because this is big risk. I mean, this is like serious risk.
Yeah.
You can tell I grew up in Los Angeles. This is like serious risk, man. Sorry. And I don't know that they're thinking that way. If I were doing it, I would hope that unless it was something that said the Russians are launching a weapon tomorrow, they just don't share it. Now, I'm sure they're not doing that. I'm absolutely sure of that. But if it were me, I mean, if he wants to appoint me to that job, and I am happy to take it, it would be, run out of a different building. It would change its name, and you'd have a whole bunch of people there still working, but you'd have a real one somewhere else.
Yeah. And is it mind-boggling to you to sit here now and even discuss like those kinds of things?
Oh, yeah.
I can only imagine that it's just like, what?
Well, on an hourly basis, either I or one of my 3 siblings says, I am so glad Mom and Daddy are not here anymore.
I've said, my mother passed in October, and I swear to you, I've said that multiple times. I've said, of all of the grief and whatever, the one thing I'm glad about, every time something happens, I go, I'm glad she's not here for this.
Oh, yeah. It did happen when you were talking about things that were a risk. My folks are buried at Arlington, and I have to say, it's an odd thing to say, but it's a very nice cemetery to visit.
Yeah, yes.
And it's very nice because you don't have to do anything. Like, they do everything,
right?
Which is nice. And it's well kept up, and it's beautiful, and people come in, and they're respectful. And I was over there one day, and there were 3 police, and I go fairly often, it's close, and there were 3 police sort of vans, and they did that barrel in through the main gate, and you can't drive into the main gate unless you have a pass that says you're visiting a grave, and you only get one of those if it's a family. And I thought, my first thought was, I'm going to turn around because I probably shouldn't be here with my parents I will now be a target. And I started to actually turn around, and then I thought, and pardon my language, oh, fuck him.
Right.
And of course, the cherry on top of this is I drive a turquoise blue Mini Cooper convertible. So they're really going to come after me?
Right.
It's like going after, I don't know, Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin. But it was really a second where I thought I can just turn around and then they won't see me at a grave and I won't be in a problem. So yeah, it's unfucking godly.
Yeah. No, and I like that spirit though, that on the fly, fuck him, because I can't tell you the number of times in the last year on things I've written, posts that I've made, podcasts that I've done. I have to remind myself that that kind of hesitation goes against everything I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because otherwise,
He wins.
look, nobody is not vulnerable.
Right.
Right? When the stakes get high enough, if you don't have your shit together and little reminders for yourself to keep you on track, you'll get off track.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my biggest concern is the country, and I'm talking about from the side of resistance and the people who are pro-democracy, from the masses getting off track far enough that without realizing what they've done, they've thrown in the towel.
Mm-hmm.
They've given up.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's my defining moment, right? And I can't tell you exactly what that looks like. I think I'll know it when I see it or hear it. But once we've gone over that point, then the rest of it's like taking candy from a baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I think and I think we have to be there for each other. And I am not that kumbaya kind of person.
Right.
Basically, it's, I'm here for me and my cat, and the rest of you can just kiss my ass.
Right.
Which is, generally not a really great position. But I think we have to just say, we're going to do this and we're all going to do it together. And
Yes.
we're going to be there. And when we need each other, we're going to do it. And I do realize that sounds like I should whip out my banjo and play Kumbaya, but I think it's true. And it was very interesting.
I
We
do
had
too.
a protest here in Bethesda, which I don't know if you know the geography around. It's like a mile from the district line, and it's a, high-end community and all that, education and the whole bit. And people were out there, and I would say there were more gray heads than anything else. And in part, I think it's because first of all, we don't have that much else to do. Other people actually don't have jobs. Plus, it's like, oh, good, an activity. How that is a sad and yet true statement. But I think it was sort of all of a sudden everybody kind of looked. And I went with two friends, but we didn't know anybody else there. But it was like, we are actually in this together, and because of who for sure who my mom was. We did a lot of Vietnam protesting here because by 1968 we were back here, and it felt similar.
Yeah. Felt that.
But less terrifying.
Right. Feel that unity.
Yeah, where you're in this, and I went down to one of I can't remember. I'm always at some protest or another. And it does feel like, okay, it's not just me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think
that's such an important feeling atmosphere, how it's something that you kind of, you feel it within, but you also, it surrounds you, even when you're alone.
Yeah.
Right? When
totally.
More and more often what I've done, I'll make a post or comment or maybe post something in the news, and over and over and over again, I'll get the question, what else, what can we do to fight this though? Or how does this end? And I've been posting more and more of this. You already know the answer. You're asking the question because you are uncomfortable with the answer you keep coming up with, and you're hoping someone will have something that's less scary and more comfortable. And then that's the comment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, well, I'll put it this way. I think most people are intelligent enough that if they choose to, right? If they choose to apply some just basic analytical thinking, look at the pieces we know, look at the history, world history and
Right.
U.S. history, look at everything backing that, it's not hard to boil it down. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It it's not that at this point there's some, like you're out in your garden and witness an orchid opening and it's this beautiful moment where everything goes back to normal. It's not.
Mm-mm.
So I think your point then, that we're there for each other. I mean, I know you're on as a CIA person, right, on the episode, but the in a way the most non-CIA thing you've said is we need to be there for each other. And I think perhaps what we might benefit from more than anything regarding that is a better understanding of what it means to be there for each other. And I think we touched on that it doesn't mean we have to build a commune, right, and all huddle together and live in that. Like you said, I've got 4 dogs here at home and 3 kids and a wife. Only 2 kids still at home. But my point is, we can come together powerfully. Mm-hmm. Without, with the exception of protests and things of that nature, we can be connected, mm-hmm. In a way that spans coast to coast, mm-hmm. right? I'm sure you have a person or two in your life who you worked with that you've got such a deep level of trust in. Mm-hmm. That it doesn't matter, they could be in Tokyo right now. And they're in Tokyo and they know you're out on the East Coast, right? But nothing changes in that connection. Mm-hmm. It's not contingent upon distance or right. proximity. And I think that right now, if we can find a way to foster that, I think that's going to be key. And I only pause there because, like I said, when people ask that question, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to even go to the potential ugliness of where this goes. But when you have somebody that's only pushing ugliness and has ugliness for an end point, what else can you realistically think about in terms of what you're up against?
That's not rhetorical, right?
Right.
Okay. Just check
right.
before I sort of.
Right. No. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, certainly, if you have anything to add to that, jump on it.
I think it's important that one of the things that we continue to highlight, and I think you're doing this, and I will confess I didn't know you existed because I don't go on social media and because I'm an old, as Steve said, grizzled old lady.
I think it's fair to say a lot of people don't know I exist.
Well, we have to change that. But I think the fact that you're interested, not willing, interested in expanding out that kind of connection is a huge story. It's going to get up on the table again. I do wash the table before I invite people to sit down and eat. Sometimes. But I think that's the kind of, from the caricature that might be you, that's a really important thing. Because people say, I did say to somebody, have you ever heard of Jack Hopkins? And it was my sister, and she is even more in a cave than I am. And she said, no. And I said, read Heather Cox Richardson on the 15th of June, because Heather Cox mentioned you, which I think is like, having me on is really good, but having her mention you is like way better, as hard as I am, as loath as I am to say that. But I think that's the kind of thing that we need, that you are and I less so, but because I'm vocal and I have a lot of time on my hands, that's the kind of connection I think we need to push, is that we're not, A, we don't live anywhere near each other. B, I can't believe you don't have cats, which is kind of something we may have to talk about.
I once did. I lived on a farm and I had a bunch.
Okay. Okay, you've got some points. Do not jump up there. Sorry. But I think that it's the kind of not cross-cultural, but cross-country connections that we need to have and foster and maintain and expand so that we're all talking. Oh, my Lord, you're about to hear such a squawk. Mikey, really don't. Mikey, somebody really is a brat. Is what we do. That's a start point, is that you build sort of the webbing underneath it, is that cross-country connection with people. I knew it. That you wouldn't necessarily run across in the circles in which you live. And that cross-country webbing, I think, is the beginning of the it's not socializing, but the beginning of the, excuse me, just let me grab. Mike, you haven't been up here in decades. What are you doing? Come sit on my lap. I know you hate me right now, but that's all right. But I think you start there and you have connections between people who look at things differently, which I think is also important. Because
Yes.
then we can say we may not agree on everything. We may have come from different places, but I'm not selling my soul to Donald Trump. And you're not selling your soul to Donald Trump. We're finding a way to fight back. But
Yes.
I think it's and I think it's cross-generational, and I think it's cross-country, and I think it's cross all the other social sorts of things there are. And I had somebody who works with the Steady State, one of our fellows, Steve found, and he had sponsored some kind of a seminar here in Washington last couple of weeks ago and asked me if I could put up anybody. And I said I could take 4. And he said, okay. And somehow on the way down here on the same bus, the 3 of them lost the 4th, which I think is a subject of concern, but he's, don't you guys want to go? They're like, nah, he'll call us. So, okay, so we never got the 4th. But they were completely on a different planet than I am, like in pretty much every way possible. And still, there was enough of a connection because here's how expansive I was. I drove them to the subway. Oh, my God. And I fed them. But now there's like a web. Now there's a connection. And they wrote to me, each of them separately wrote to me after he bombed Iran and said, what do I think? What do I think? And that's another beginning of sort of things that can be, you are really a pain in the ass. I even put out extra food. I'm sorry, Jack. But I think those are
not at all.
Connections that are, I know. I'm sorry. Hey, Mike, look what I have. You want a treat? Come here, Mikey. This is why children of mine would become serial killers. For all I know, he's a serial killer. I know. Look what you get. I think those connections are what we need.
Yeah. Yeah, I do as well. I had an experience just a couple of days ago. I saw a lifelong friend of mine. He was a warrant officer in the Army. He was a Apache helicopter and a pilot, and he lives in the same area that I do. Republican, not MAGA. And we ran into each other at the gas pumps. Hadn't seen him for some time as far as speaking to him. And even though I'm fairly certain all of his foundational roots are still conservative and Republican, we were able to stand there for over an hour and voice our concerns about what we're facing, right? There was such value in that for me. I've reflected on that quite a little bit since the conversation. And it's such a refreshing thing to be able to have different positions and still, as you said, you were as different as, night and day between those three or four people. Well, 4 and 1 lost, but
somewhere between here and Connecticut.
But to be able to say this thing is so important that we can put everything else over here for now and unify. And I think we've if nothing else, and I certainly hope there's something else, but if nothing else, if we can find a way to increase that web of connections, I think that's so key. And here's what's interesting is when two people get together and talk that have kind of a common goal. I never imagined that on this episode with you, we'd be spending the time that we've spent talking about that. But I think that that's what can happen is you have the ability when you communicate, when you talk, and when you're connected to break out of those molds of usual discussion and to say, this is not really in our wheelhouse, so to speak, but we both agree this is important. Mm-hmm. And those conversations are.
And I think we all have to we're not going to stay in our wheelhouses now.
Right.
I'm getting out of the wheelhouse.
Yes.
And I'm not an expert in X, Y, and Z, but all they need me to do is go downtown and make noise. That I can do, or sign this thing. And I think we win.
Yes. You know what? And let's wrap up with this, because I'm not now, sometimes people will tell me, you're such an optimist, Jack. I'm not. I'm a realist. And I know how to, because I think that's important, I know how to weave an upbeat feeling into uncomfortable realism. Mm-hmm. Kind of blend, right? Because sometimes realism framed the wrong way can be very counterproductive because it kills fight, it kills motivation. Right. So, but I think we have to be realistic and look, and the phrase, which is not politically correct today, but it's not over till the fat lady sings.
Right.
And I'm not seeing the fat lady, right? At least not one who's singing. And that is a spirit that not only that I have and feel, but when we are paying attention, that's a spirit that is so woven through our country. Mm-hmm. So any talk of, like I see, I posted something today and somebody, well, it's already too late, Jack. If I'm breathing and my heart is beating, my attitude is, it ain't too late. Uh-uh. It's too late for me when they lower me into the ground. That's my attitude.
Yeah.
Because any other attitude, we just assist the very thing that we claim to be resisting.
Yeah, exactly. You have to, Nelson Mandela didn't ever do that.
No. Right.
And I'm sure there are others, but that was the first thing that came to me, is there are plenty of people who've stayed with the fight. And if they could do it, I can do it, and they can do it, you can do it. And I do think the connection, and I do think you're doing a fabulous thing by building some of the connection.
Well, I appreciate that.
You can sleep well tonight. Tomorrow may be a different I do mean that, Jack, because I was like, oh God, I've only done this on really, really friendly places, and I know if he's friendly, I can't tell. And of course, oh my God. And Steve said, shut up and do it. Mr. Gracious. In fact, he was here, and I was like, Steve.
Oh, really?
He was here. We live about maybe 2 miles apart.
Oh, nice.
And
nice.
His longtime family friends, his kids are friends of my family's, and they used to come visit my parents. Is that the sweetest thing ever?
Wow.
But he said to me, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he basically said, it's another block in the wall. This is a connection. I said, what if we don't like? He was like, oh, for God's sakes. So I think that's what we say, is today we may have built some more bridges.
What a perfect ending. I'm so grateful for those kind words. And likewise, gosh, you've shared so much that I think people who were excited about listening to this episode or watching this episode were wanting to hear. But like I said early on, this has been so conversational that you've also filled in. When you watch somebody in a rigid setting where it's just rapid fire questions, and they answer them and they move on, you never get a sense, I think, of who that person is. You got their answer, mm-hmm. but it didn't tell you a whole lot about them. And so I think the more conversational something is, you do get to learn more about that person. And to me, that's where the real meaning of the answers they give comes from. Mm-hmm. because without that context,
Who knows?
it could be the curveball, right?
Oh, that was unnecessarily ugly, I would just like to say.
So, Margaret, thank you
Oh, Jack, thank you. It was,
so much.
no, thank you.
You have been very pleasant, very cordial, and just great to spend this much time with me.
Back
And
at you.
I think you and I could probably agree that for as many people as we have that might not like us, I think we found we like each other at the very least. So
I would say that at the least. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
thank you.
If
And
someone weren't so whiny,
yeah, well, tell Mikey he can relax now. And Jack said, hey.
I'll tell him.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. I'm still on.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.